It's the New York City of ancient Egypt. The kingdom's most important center for international trade. The place where pharaohs come to be crowned and revered. The home of gods and mythic heroes. Then, 2,000 years ago, it disappears without a trace.
The legend informs us of a city in Egypt with a Temple of Hercules that was a great emporium, a trading center. It was an enormous source of wealth for Egypt proper.
Many have hunted for the fabled city on land, but no sign of it has ever been found. One of the world's most celebrated archaeologists, Frank Gaudio, believes he can succeed where others have failed. By looking somewhere new.
I thought it would be extraordinary to find it and excavate it and see what it could teach us about the past.
Frank puts together one of the biggest underwater archaeological expeditions ever undertaken, equipped with the latest technology. His goal, to track down the lost city of Heraklion. Unravel myth from history. And rewrite the story of Egypt. The hunt for Heraklion begins on the North Egyptian coast. Scouring the ancient texts, Frank and his team have narrowed their search down to here. East of modern-day Alexandria, a 40-square-mile area in the Bay of Abu Qir. In 1996, they start to scour the area in forensic detail. Using the very latest nuclear magnetic resonance probes and high-resolution sonar scanners, searching for any evidence that may lurk beneath these turbulent estuary waters.
You have a team looking at you for days, it's fine. For weeks, okay. For months, it starts to be very hard, and people are coming to you and say, Frank, are you sure?
All Frank has to go on are 2,000-year-old stories. They speak of a mighty metropolis in the Nile Delta, with a massive port, the outside world's gateway to Egypt, and a great temple dedicated to the gods who give the pharaohs their right to rule these lands. Greek writers suggest Heraklion exists between the 8th and 2nd centuries BC. But their descriptions are mixed up with fantastical stories of mythical heroes. From the half-god Heracles founding the city, to Helen of Troy seeking refuge in its temple with her lover Paris. As months of searching turn to years, it would be easy to suspect Frank is chasing a myth.
Of course, there is always the doubt that, is it existing, really? Are you looking in the right spot, you know? All those questions give you the full responsibility of the mission, whether it fails or it does succeed.
Finally, Frank spots something. A change in the magnetic readings bouncing off the seabed, indicating that the sediment here has been disturbed by something. After 4 years of searching, it's the lead he needs. He zeroes in on one corner of the bay, where he discovers something unexpected.
There is something very strange here. It's a straight line. And in nature, you very rarely find something absolutely straight. I had the feeling that there was something very important.
Divers investigate what's behind the signal. But they find nothing.
I was hoping something could be seen. And the diver came back saying, sand, flat sand.
But Frank trusts his data. The divers return and begin to dig through the sand. It's several feet thick. So armed with dredges, they set to work sucking up tons of sand and silt to see what lies below. It's a long, slow process.
First foot of sediment, we found some shard mixed with the sand, ceramic. It's interesting. Then, on the third feet of the sediment, something white appeared. A limestone block, beautifully preserved, like if it were new.
The quality of the limestone Frank uncovers means it must come from quarries further south. There is only one way it could have gotten here.
There is no limestone whatsoever in the Bay of Aboukir. Thus, it was obvious that there was there something made by man.
Could this be part of the lost city Frank spent years searching for? With visibility limited to only a few feet, it's hard for him to make out what he has discovered. But now we can. Using sophisticated computer software to drain away water and sand, to reveal an accurate picture of what lies beneath this corner of Aboukir Bay. A series of limestone blocks gradually appears, all with the same regular shape. Some are stacked on top of each other in what looks like a wall. And measuring 10 feet wide and over 500 feet long, it's huge. But just beyond, more ruins. From the position of the limestone pieces, Frank believes this was once a single structure the size of a city block. It's a remarkable find, the first glimpse of what may be the famous lost city of Heraklion.
Finding a large structure of limestone indicates an enormous expenditure of time, energy, and resources because that limestone had to be quarried from further south in Egypt. And that tells you that you're in an important site.
According to legend, the most important building in the lost city was its famous temple to Heracles. Are these limestone blocks part of it? Frank needs more evidence. Returning to the drained landscape, something catches the eye. A different kind of stone, black granite. 7 blocks of it, leading to the temple. Examining them more closely, it's clear they've been carved. The face of a man and the body of a lion. They are sphinxes. Whatever this site is, it's ancient Egyptian.
This discovering a Sphinx was extremely exciting because we knew that we were on an Egyptian monument. And little by little, the whole picture came to our mind.
Sphinxes are symbols of protection. Great avenues of guardian sphinxes still exist, leading up to sacred Egyptian buildings. The size, the limestone, the avenue of sphinxes. All signs point to this being a temple, and maybe the famous Temple of Heracles itself.
To find a missing temple under the sea, under the sediment, is something nearly unbelievable.
Is perhaps the greatest archaeological discovery to have ever happened in the Nile Delta.
And there's more. As Frank and the team scour the area for clues, they come across faces from a lost world. Archaeologist Frank Gaudio has discovered a mysterious ancient temple lying underwater just off the coast of northern Egypt. He believes it may be the famous Temple of Heracles, part of the lost city of Heraklion. To be sure, he needs more evidence of when it is built and who it belongs to. Searching for clues, his team painstakingly siphons away hundreds of tons of sand from around the site, revealing parts of a huge statue.
At the very beginning, we could not understand exactly what it was because we saw something looking like a foot, but it was so big that I said, no, it must be something else. But suddenly we found the face.
Hewn from red granite, this jumble of giant limbs and faces clearly represents a number of human figures.
All I can say is, wow! That is the largest complex of monumental statues ever discovered in the Egyptian Delta. It's extraordinary and unparalleled.
Their location reveals they stood just outside the temple entrance. Discovering whom they portray could help reveal the temple's true name and purpose.
The $64,000 question is how to identify the individuals represented by the statues because they are not inscribed.
Using data from the dive, we can do something never possible before. Digitally reconstruct these long-lost figures. As the pieces come together, 3 colossal statues take shape. Each stands over 16 feet high and weighs over 6 tons. Carved atop the heads of 2 of the statues, a man and a woman, are royal crowns. A pharaoh and his queen. The presence and sheer scale of the royal couple suggests this is a temple of major significance. Egyptologist and art historian Dr. Bob Bianchi studies the representation of pharaohs in ancient Egyptian art. He's come to the temple of Kom Ombo, near Aswan, where he believes images on the wall may shed light on the underwater statues in Abu Qir Bay and help reveal the temple's age.
So royal images in any given period of Egyptian history are characterized by what we call a period style.
Nowhere is this more obvious than in representations of the pharaohs.
So here we have an image of a pharaoh surrounded by deities. The first thing we notice is that the pharaoh's head is protected by a sacred cobra, the uraeus, and the tail of the cobra has a little bit of a loop that goes to our left-hand side. And then there's this curious feature of the depression of the navel that looks like a teardrop navel. All of these features, from the head into the torso, are exactly the same details that we found on the royal statue.
It's evidence that both carvings are from the same period.
This particular example is dated to the Ptolemaic period, 305 to 30 BC. So in my estimation, the statue found at the site is also to be dated to the Ptolemaic period.
The Ptolemies are the last pharaohs to rule ancient Egypt before it falls to Rome. And crucially, they rule at the same time that Heraclion itself is supposed to have existed. The date of the temple in Abu Qir Bay is a likely match for the lost city. The scale and location all suggest that the temple could have been the centerpiece of Heraclion. But until Frank discovers whom the temple was dedicated to, he can't know for sure. Ancient records state the temple in Heraclion was dedicated to the Greek god Heracles. By the time of the Ptolemies, strong trade links between Greece and Egypt mean their cultures are closely entwined. Greeks adopted Egyptian gods, and vice versa. If this is the temple in Heraclion, both Greeks and Egyptians would have worshipped its gods.
I thought let us go and do an excavation in the heart of the temple, where normally the shrine containing the main god of the temple should stand. And we started to uncover, little by little, a red granite pyramid.
This unassuming stone shrine belonged to the main god of the temple. Studying it up close, it's possible to make out intricately carved shapes running down the sides. They're faded and worn, but they appear to be ancient Egyptian writing, hieroglyphs. The 2,300-year-old message is deciphered, and it finally reveals which god this temple is dedicated to.
What we have discovered was the shrine saying, "I am the house of the god Amon-Gereb." Thus, at that time, we knew that we were in the temple of Amon-Gereb.
Amun-Gereb, the god who gives the pharaohs their right to rule. This is the place where the kings of Egypt come formally to receive their title. But that's not all.
There is a stela in Cairo Museum in 3 languages, hieroglyph, Demotic and Greek, saying that the temple of Amon-Gereb was also the temple of Heracles.
Finally, the proof Frank needs. He now knows that he's found the lost city of Heraclion.
It was quite fantastic. With one artifact, we had the identity of that temple, but furthermore, we knew that we were in the middle of the city we were looking for, the city of Heraclion.
Case closed. We've now been able to link the archaeological site with the Greek testimonia that came before it.
It's proof the city of Heraclion is more than a legend. Using Frank's data, the mighty temple is now revealed, just as it once stood in the heart of the city.
the Alley of Sphinxes, the Colossus statue in front.
This must have just blown you away, traveling either by sea or coming from land to see this gigantic structure. It was absolutely breathtaking.
Now, knowing the huge significance of this legendary city, Frank's desperate to find the rest of it. While temples were built from stone, all other Egyptian buildings, including palaces, were made from mud brick, which likely broke up and dissolved underwater. To find traces of the city's crumbling ruins, Frank employs a new piece of technology, a high-resolution sub-bottom profiler. Its high-frequency sound waves are better able to detect wood and mud brick than magnetometers. At nearly 700 feet from the temple, it detects something solid.
I can see that it's not something very hard. It's not stone, but it does reflect the beam. Thus, it could be a layer of clay which is harder than another layer of clay or wood. It's a very strange feature here.
The underwater team investigates. Within a few hours, they find the source of the strange signal. Wooden timbers. Could these really have survived from the days of the lost city of Heraklion? Archaeologist Frank Gaudio and his team are searching for evidence of Heraklion's famous port. Frank has discovered a mysterious wooden object, which he believes could reveal clues about the city. The Mediterranean swell makes it hard for the divers to see what they've uncovered. But now we can drain away thousands more tons of sediment from Abu Qir Bay to reveal what lies buried beneath the sand. The ghostly skeleton of a wooden ship. Its planks exposed to the light of day for the first time since the age of the pharaohs. These are considered among the oldest wooden timbers ever discovered, yet they are in astonishingly good condition. The hull is largely intact and reveals the ship is flat-bottomed. But what's most extraordinary is the way the hull has been pieced together. Frank has never seen this ship design before. He calls in maritime archaeologist Damien Robinson to help make sense of it.
The ship itself is built in a way that we've not seen in archaeology before. It's got a strange brick-like pattern of the planking, and the planks themselves are joined together in a way that hasn't been recorded.
Traditionally, wooden ships are made of long, thin planks. This bizarre layered design is totally unique. What is this vessel, and why is it designed so strangely? The cargo it was carrying is long gone, so they study the wood itself.
We took a whole series of samples of the wood, and you can look at the microstructure and identify what wood type it was. And so this, we were really fortunate that it was a wood type called acacia.
The stunted, curvy branches of the acacia tree are not ideal shipbuilding material, but it's one of the only tree species that can endure Egypt's hot, dry climate.
It was a very exciting find, simply because it enabled us to think that this was an Egyptian ship.
The wood reveals this was probably a local vessel, rather than a foreign trade ship. And it can also shed light on where it traveled, thanks to a voracious marine mollusk called shipworm, which preys on seafaring wooden ships.
it was undamaged by shipworms. And this helps us to think that perhaps this wasn't a seagoing ship, that perhaps it was more of a river-going ship.
The ship's wide, flat hull also points to river travel, enabling it to navigate shallow waterways like the Nile Delta. But the ship's purpose remains a mystery. Studying the ancient texts reveals a vital clue.
But fortuitously, the text of Herodotus tells us almost word for word how our ship was built. It was as if he'd been to a shipyard and seen one of these constructed and then written it down.
Using the words of Herodotus, we can now understand exactly how this boat is built and what it is used for. With the stunted wood of acacia most readily available, shipwrights lay rows of short planks along the hull, offset like bricks, to minimize the pressure at each joint. Using this entirely new method of shipbuilding, they create vessels 90 feet long and 26 feet wide, capable of carrying 120 tons of cargo. Ancient river trading barges called barrus.
It's staggering that Herodotus can help us 2,500 years later to solve the mystery of how this ship was put together.
The presence of a single cargo ship hints that some sort of trade went on around the temple. But it's not nearly enough evidence for an international trade center. As divers continue to investigate, they find strange carved stone blocks scattered around the wreck. Their shape and design varies, but all have one thing in common: a hole approximately 3 inches wide. To Damien, it's clear these are holes for rope, meaning one thing.
We've started to discover ancient anchors. Clearly, these anchors were thrown in to anchor the ship, but then they got stuck, and so they were just cut away and left.
In total, the team uncovers more than 700 anchors.
The anchors are extremely significant because they enable us to work out which parts were land and which parts were anchorages.
It's clear now that hundreds of ships visited the city. Frank's data also reveals dozens more wrecks that litter the site. It's the largest collection of ancient shipwrecks ever discovered anywhere on Earth. Plotting the locations of the wrecks and the anchors, Frank can now map the layout of the city. The outline of a central harbor appears, interconnected by a network of waterways and canals. The temple is surrounded by a huge port city.
All those shipwrecks, those hundreds of anchors, were pointing to a very active port, which had been active for centuries.
If we put the ships together with the statues, together with the size of the temple, together with the Greek descriptions, we have a picture of a thriving economic powerhouse.
Frank Gaudio has uncovered that Heraklion was a great port city, but he has yet to find evidence it's the thriving international trade hub described by the ancient Greeks. As the team excavates further, they begin to uncover objects left behind by the city's inhabitants. From luxury jewelry and perfume bottles to simple wine amphora and cooking pots. Each object shines light on the everyday lives of the people here. And analyzing the individual designs, the team discovers many of these artifacts were not made in Egypt.
We have ceramic from all over the Mediterranean world. From Sicily, from Attic, this is Attic, pristine quality imported ceramic.
So far, Frank has identified pottery from 18 different places. Some of it almost 3,000 years old. Mapping these findings reveals that a complex network of trade routes linked the port of Heraklion to the rest of the Mediterranean. This port city was clearly a thriving multicultural hub, where not only produce, but ideas and beliefs flowed between different cultures, opening up ancient Egyptian civilization to the rest of the Mediterranean world.
The importance of this city cannot be underestimated because they now had ready access via the maritime routes to all of the luxury goods and the agricultural bounty of ancient Egypt.
The scale of the port reveals Heraklion was likely one of the most important cities in Egypt.
It's a bit like New York. It's got riverfronts crammed with ships coming in from all over the trading world.
Very cosmopolitan, very colorful, very picturesque kind of a place to be in. Analogous to any port city that you can imagine today.
Dating the artifacts discovered in Heraklion reveals that the city thrived from the 8th to 2nd centuries BC. But aside from its temple and role in international trade, we know next to nothing about it. What secrets can this shipwreck reveal about the key role this city played in the everyday lives of the people of Egypt? Frank Gaudio and his team are searching for clues to what life was like in the newly discovered city of Heraklion. As divers explore the site, they discover yet another shipwreck. But nothing about this one makes sense.
You can see concentration of shipwreck here and there, but there is one totally isolated. It's totally different from the others.
Not only is this wreck over 1,200 feet from most of the other wrecks, it's in a canal right beside the temple. Frank suspects there is something special about this ship. It's hard to see the full picture in the murky water. But we can finally reveal its secrets. A hull emerges. Long and shallow, it's beautifully crafted. With a width of only 6 feet, it's clearly not designed to carry cargo or ferry people. The hull is remarkably intact, but a hole in it reveals that a section of the keel is missing. And unlike a barrass, it's made from long, wide planks. It's clear to Frank the ship is not made of acacia wood.
We realize that such ship has been built from sycamore wood. Sycamore be the tree of life for ancient Egyptians.
Sycamore has a powerful significance in ancient Egyptian religion. 2 sycamore trees mark the point on the horizon where Ra, the sun god, rises every morning. And the sky goddess, Nut, takes the form of a sycamore branch.
Sycamore is fraught with religious symbolism within the culture of Egypt. So if this boat is made of sycamore, all of the symbolic associations of sycamore are brought to bear on that boat.
So what is the function of this spiritually important vessel? Egyptologist Arto Belekdanian believes he has an answer. The key evidence lies 600 miles south of Heraklion, at the Temple of Philae in Aswan. Among the images carved on the walls of this 2,000-year-old temple, there is a perfect match for the mystery ship.
So this ship right here, you can see that it's long and slender, and it is exactly the shape of the ship that was discovered in the canal. Right off the bat, I can tell you this is a processional barge. This is the barge that was used to carry the image of a god.
The theory that this is the processional barge of an Egyptian god explains its position near the temple, the home of the gods. But why it sinks remains a mystery. As divers hunt for clues around the wreck, they stumble across a series of strange objects. Miniature models of the ritual barge made of lead.
This is one of the best. You can see the papyrus here. And we found 22 of them, now 23 with this one. Yeah. I love them. They're so nice, so strange.
Nothing like these has ever been found before. Their position all around the ceremonial barge suggests they are offerings to the god it carried.
Unlike gold, that shiny, celestial, luminous metal associated with the sun god, lead is dull, it's heavy, it has associations with the underground. These offerings were meant for the god Osiris, the ruler of the underworld.
Osiris was among the most popular of all Egyptian gods. Worship of him culminated in a great annual festival, where an image of the god was carried around the city in an elaborate procession of ships and boats. Arto believes the barge in Heraklion is the actual ship used in this iconic event.
As the barge of Osiris proceeded along the canal, hundreds of torches lit the way. Crowds of people standing on either side of the canal, watching as the procession passed them by, depositing votive offerings, pouring libations into the Nile. Fires were being lit, meat was being cooked as an offering to the god, incense was being burned.
But given its prestigious role, how does this ship, built to carry a god, end up at the bottom of a canal? Returning to the drained landscape provides a clue. Looking closer at the hole in the hull, it's possible to make out a series of repeated cuts in the surrounding wood. Saw marks. Frank can think of only one reason for this deliberate damage to such a sacred vessel.
When such a barge was too old to be used anymore, what to do with such an object? You could not destroy it because it has been touched by the god of the underworld, Osiris. To get rid of such a boat, the only way was to give it back to the god by sinking it on purpose.
After serving in Egypt's greatest festival, the sacred barge itself becomes an offering to the gods. The annual festival for Osiris is celebrated throughout Egypt. But the size of this ritual barge suggests it holds a particular importance in Heraklion.
Size is always an index of power, wealth, and importance. And to have a vessel of this size in that city, the largest ever found actually in Egypt, I would say this was probably the most important Osiris sanctuary in that particular part of the Delta.
The city of Heraklion rises to fame for its role in international trade. It also flourishes as an important religious center. And yet this thriving metropolis now lies at the bottom of the sea. What can these cracks beneath the city teach us about its terrifying fate? The city of Heraklion, the former trade emporium of Egypt. now lies buried, 20 feet beneath the waves of the Mediterranean. No historical texts record the demise of the city, but Frank suspects a clue lies in what happened to the city's most iconic building, the temple. Excavating beneath the temple, Frank finds chilling evidence that something catastrophic happened here.
We have here human remains. We found them trapped under a block which fell from the temple. And this, of course, reveals that there has been there a sudden event and human beings have been trapped.
Whatever happened, it happened fast. Geologist Ian Stewart tries to discover what triggered the temple's sudden destruction. Studying the location of Heraklion, he has a prime suspect.
So this is a map showing essentially the landscape of the Eastern Mediterranean. So our site is located just at this little cusp here. And from this, it doesn't really seem as if there's much in terms of danger or threat. But actually, if we put on top the tectonic template, what we find is these red lines are all fault lines, earthquake fault lines. So when you look at it, you know, this is a tectonically active area. For me, it says one thing, and that's earthquake. An earthquake has destroyed that temple.
Earthquakes regularly rock Egypt. Hundreds of quakes are known to have struck the northern coast since 2200 BC. This explains the destruction of the temple, but not how an entire city disappears beneath the waves. Using Frank's data, we can drain deeper into the landscape. The sand and silt exposes a dense layer of clay underlying the city. Although the temple is built on top of the clay, limestone blocks now lie buried within it. Nearby, the clay opens up in a huge crack, almost 2 feet wide. It's buckled up at the edges, as if something has burst its way up from below. Across the city, there are many of these strange fissures in the underlying clay. Ian recognizes this unique geological fingerprint. It reveals Heraklion was struck by a terrifying after effect of the earthquake.
It looks like that muddy seabed has been broken up and forced apart, and the process most likely to do that is liquefaction. So liquefaction is this process that if you have sediment with a lot of water in it, then the shaking that sediment forces the sediment particles apart, and under that great pressure, the water is forced up and breaks out at the surface.
Seismic activity loosens the underlying sediment, releasing water which erupts through the clay, breaking it apart to form cracks, and buckling it upwards with the force. This pressure released, the ground collapses and behaves like quicksand, destabilizing anything built on top of it.
You get geysers and fountains of water, produce a kind of quicksand. And it's a really scary phenomenon.
Recent events in Palau, Indonesia, reveal how this process can carry away buildings and entire sections of land in a matter of minutes. Ian believes Heraklion's location made it even more vulnerable.
So this city in the Nile Delta is built on layer upon layer of waterlogged sand piled on top of each other in an area that gets hit by earthquakes. So this is a tragedy waiting to happen.
Piecing together all the evidence, we can now finally reveal what happened to the great city of Heraklion. A massive earthquake strikes the temple, sending its statues and pillars tumbling.
Things are starting to crumble down. And everything's moving, the whole world is in motion.
Water erupts through the underlying clay, suddenly turning the ground to quicksand, engulfing blocks from the temple.
The columns would have collapsed several meters in a fraction of a second.
Loosened by the sudden release of water, the land underlying the city begins to slide downhill.
Sliding towards the sea and beneath the waves. It must have felt like the end of the world.
This great city, with its once thriving port and sacred sites, is lost to the sea.
As the sea covered the whole area and sealed the site.
An extraordinary capital of trade, wealth, and culture is gone.
It was absolutely breathtaking.
A little over a century later, Egypt itself will fall to Rome, ending the extraordinary 3,000-year reign of the great pharaohs.
The Black Sea, home to lost tales of ancient mariners that only now are coming into full view.
It's like finding a dinosaur with feathers. That's how rare it was.
What can a surprising shipwreck reveal about the men who ruled these waters for 1,000 years?
These ships were feeding and maintaining a whole empire.
And it helped turn the empire into one of the greatest ever known.
How does a glint of precious metal reveal a battle to decide the fate of two empires?
This event changed naval warfare all around the world.
And what does a lost U-boat say about Hitler's plans to build his own empire here? 3 mysteries, 3 expeditions, 1 sea of secrets.
The Black Sea is filled with mystery. There's always been warfare, strife, and battles taking place on or near the Black Sea, contesting for that territory. There are so many connections to be made, but there's so little evidence to go from.
Between Europe and Asia, 6 countries crowd around the shores of the Black Sea, with just one small outlet connecting it to the world's oceans. The vessels that plied these waters over 1,000 years ago have long been a mystery. Historians have only a handful of descriptions in ancient texts. Finding an actual shipwreck could change everything.
In 2007, I received an invitation to come and take part of an expedition to the Black Sea. And this was very exciting.
It's really been kind of unexplored. And so only a handful of expeditions have really done surveys looking for shipwrecks in these waters. The Black Sea is where I did my first few expeditions, and so it's where I started to learn the process of how we locate ancient shipwrecks.
Archaeologists have long suspected the Black Sea could be hiding a treasure trove of wrecks because of the unusual properties of its water.
Well, the Black Sea chemistry is unique because from about 600 feet all the way down to the very bottom of the Black Sea, there is literally no oxygen in the water in the so-called anoxic layer. Everywhere else, shipwrecks are not preserved, mostly because of a very nasty little sea worm. They eat everything, meaning ships, rope, all of the stuff that you would find on an ancient wooden ship. Usually gone everywhere else except the Black Sea.
No one had ever searched for shipwrecks in the deepest layers of the Black Sea until 2000.
The explorer Robert Ballard set out to explore the bottom of the Black Sea like it had never been done before.
Dr. Ballard is the world-renowned ocean explorer who found Titanic in 1985. On his very first expedition to the Black Sea, no one was ready for what he would find. Ballard's expedition found shipwrecks near a town called Sinope.
They found 3 Sinope shipwrecks right off the bat, A, B, and C. They were in an area of the Black Sea that only partially preserved shipwrecks. And it was only, like all archaeological excavations are, on the last day, at the last minute, that they decided to look in deeper anoxic waters, and that's when they found Sinope D. The team on the ship must have been quite confused. They were looking at multiple vertical timbers sticking out of the mud, one of them quite large. And all of a sudden, the realization must have dawned on them, this is an ancient shipwreck. They saw structural features that had never before been seen intact on an ancient vessel, only in illustrations. Prior to this shipwreck, no other ships had been found in the anoxic layer, perfectly preserved. This meant that archaeologists, for the first time, could look at a shipwreck in its full dimensionality, and now there's nothing we have to guess at. Sinope D was an unprecedented find. It's like finding a dinosaur with feathers. That's how rare it was. But in 2000, all the team could do is look at what they were seeing on the seabed. They didn't know the date of the ship. It could have been an ancient Greek ship, it could have been Roman, it could have been built 200 years ago. They just didn't know. There was an obsession to go back.
How old was the ship? Where was it sailing to? Where was it coming from? A lot of these things were still a mystery.
When Dan and Mike joined the 2007 expedition, they hope that new technology will bring new answers.
The 2007 expedition was specifically designed for us to spend a week really investigating this wreck in depth. In these waters that we're exploring, it's way too deep for scuba divers, so we need to use remotely operated vehicles to get down to those depths and get good, high-quality video of these sites.
We had a workhorse, state-of-the-art, remotely operated vehicle named Hercules that could help us explore the wreck in multiple ways and take high-definition video of the entire operation. So I remember this view approaching Sinope D for the first time in 2007 and just being blown away.
And here you have it, the well-preserved wooden shipwreck mast still standing.
About the only one we have. They're very rare.
And you've got a piece of rope still wrapped around the top, which is unheard of.
I saw the mast for the first time, and it was a magic moment for me. It was emotional.
Hercules allows the team to measure every inch of what's left on the sea floor. Before they can figure out the ship's purpose, they'll need to analyze the wreck's size, shape, and design.
What we find is a 45-foot-long ship. A single mast that probably carried a square sail. There's no evidence of decking in the middle of the wreck. So we can assume it's a cargo hold. And lucky for us, there's cargo still on board. Typically, when we stumble upon an ancient shipwreck, the first clue we look for is the cargo. Usually these clay jars called amphoras. Amphoras carried everything. They carried olive oil, they carried fish sauce, they carried wine.
These diagnostic amphoras that can help us put a date on the wreck and tell how old it is. Recovering an artifact from a shipwreck is not a simple process. They use a little sucker that the ROV would put on the amphora to pick it up without damaging it. So they would move it over to a net. Once we have artifacts in these nets, we get it on board as carefully as possible. Watching the ROV pilots handle these artifacts, put them carefully into these baskets, and then send them up to the surface is really nerve-wracking because we don't want them damaged.
The hope is that a close study of the clay jars will establish the age of the shipwreck.
An amphora holds a lot of information about the ancient world. Amphoras can be dated quite precisely because they're everywhere and they're very well studied. So the amphoras can be dated through their physical characteristics, normally the handles and the neck, but also what we call the foot, which is the bottom part. People can compare the new find with the already studied one and establish a quite precise date. So for Sinop, they're fairly small. They are mostly carrot-shaped, and some of them have grooves that go around the entire body of the amphora. And so those are quite distinctive characteristics that give a clear idea of the date when Sinop D was sailing on the Black Sea.
The amphora that we documented were dated to the 5th and 6th centuries AD. We had never before had a shipwreck that is 1,500 years old in its entirety, preserved on the seabed.
The dates mean Sinop D is sailing at the tail end of the Roman Empire. What can it reveal about a new power that's rising to take its place?
Now that we knew what the date of the ship was, it was exciting because Sinop D dates to this pivotal moment in world history.
By the 5th century, the once mighty Roman Empire is crumbling. Except in the east, which breaks away to create the Byzantine Empire. Its capital no longer Rome, but the great city of Constantinople. Modern-day Istanbul.
The choice of Constantinople as the capital is mostly because of a strategic position. It was located in between the two continents, Asia and Europe. It was by the sea, so it could easily transport goods and troops. And so Constantinople at the time of the Byzantine Empire became the largest city in the world and the most wealthy.
Constantinople's wealth depends on Black Sea ports like Sinop. And Sinop D may have played a pivotal role in Byzantine history.
Now we had some fundamental questions that we needed answers for. Among them, how does this ship connect to the history of the Byzantine Empire itself? How did it contribute to the growth of the empire?
One way to answer those questions is to investigate the ship itself.
The wreck was so enticing, but the ship is so deeply buried in sediment. It was giving up its mysteries with such great difficulty. We knew that we would have to start excavating the shipwreck. With Hercules, now we had the capability of removing silt in large volumes and exposing more of its timbers. Ah, yes. All the mud. Look at this Black Sea mud.
Yeah, it's really sticky and almost like Jell-O the way it moves.
I remember just thinking, what a strange seabed. Never seen anything like that before. Removing the silt was a painstaking process. The upper layers, very easy to remove. But as we dug deeper into the mud, the more thick the mud became. And at that point, our work slowed way down. We managed to explore a little bit of some of the planking, but we were not able to dig as deep as we wanted to, unfortunately. We did not find anything that would give away how the ship was constructed. It was a disappointment.
The Black Sea's stubborn mud dashes the expedition's hopes. The secrets of Sinop D remain unknown. Then comes news of a stunning archaeological find, one that reignites the stalled investigation into Sinop D.
Since the discovery of Sinop D in 2000, what have we learned about shipbuilding?
We've been really fortunate to find this graveyard of shipwrecks in modern-day Istanbul, ancient Constantinople. The old harbor that served the city was buried in silt over the centuries, and as they were clearing it out to build a subway, they found 37 ancient shipwrecks. Lucky for us, the discoveries in this harbor, called Yenikapı, all date to the Byzantine period. And what you see at Yenikapı is an evolution of Black Sea shipbuilding techniques. Sinop D is right there in the 5th and 6th century, which is about the midpoint between those 37 wrecks that were found. Yenikapı provides all the evidence for the lower part of the ships because their upper works were not preserved. Sinop D provides almost a perfectly preserved example of the top to the middle.
Yeah.
So now we can bring those two together and get a full comprehensive picture for the first time. There was this earlier tradition in which shipwrights lock planks together edge to edge, and then they peg them together so that they can't slide, they can't come apart, and then inserted the skeleton to help stiffen the hull. And then there's this later tradition that switched completely. It's where you build the frames or the ribs of the ship first, and then you plank it all around it to create the shell. Edge joinery is still being used, but it's not on the elaborate scale that we had in the earlier tradition. So the result is cheaper, faster ship construction. Fewer people needed in the shipyard, fewer trained people, fewer skilled people.
And probably less wood, too.
Less wood, cheaper, faster.
Yeah.
Because of the dates suggested by those amphoras, we now know that Sinop D fits within this transition between those two ship construction techniques. So now we can piece together all this evidence to finally see what's under the mud and tell the full story of Sinop D's life. Sinop D is a cargo vessel, a merchant ship filled with amphoras. It was likely trading between the very prosperous port city of Sinop and the capital city itself, Constantinople. It might have even been heading to the same harbor where that earlier graveyard of shipwrecks was found at Yenikapi.
The ability to construct ships faster and cheaper is a game changer for the Byzantine Empire. And the secret can be seen in the Sinop-D wreck.
With this cheaper way of building ships, a middle class emerges who's able to buy the ship, captain the ship, act as the merchant, and actually create their own wealth. So in this sense, the Sinop-D shipwreck is a wealth creator. It's a type of economic engine for the middle class.
I don't think it's a coincidence that a new type of shipbuilding starts to arise at the same time that the Byzantine Empire begins to flourish. These trading ships, like Sinop-D, were feeding and maintaining a whole empire. And this is the beginning of a long period of lucrative trading.
This was one of many ships that helped generate the extreme wealth of the empire, and it helped turn the empire into one of the greatest ever known.
Sinop continues to be a key port along the Black Sea, long after the fall of the Byzantines, and its waters conceal other secrets.
Hayatım Sinop'ta geçti.
I have lived in Sinop all my life, and being underwater is my passion.
Karadeniz'i diğer denizler.
The Black Sea is, as its name suggests, the black, dark sea.
Karanlık bir deniz olması, siyah, kara bir deniz.
In other seas, you see a dark shade of blue, but this blackness of the Black Sea is one worth seeing.
Koyu bir mavi.
The darkness really fascinates me.
Yeshar Taraksha has been finding relics in Sinop Harbor ever since he started diving as a boy. He's found ancient Roman and Byzantine artifacts and even old cannons. But one discovery proves to be the find of a lifetime.
80'li yılların başında.
In the early 1980s, because I was a professional diver, I was called by a local fisherman to rescue some snagged nets.
Bu kurtarma esnasında
During the dive, I couldn't see anything because of the mud.
çamur nedeniyle hiçbir şey göremiyorum.
But using our hands, we realized the nets were covering an old ship.
Ettik önce.
The curious wreck consumes Yeshar for 40 years. What is this ship, and how did it end up on the seafloor?
I dived the wreck several times and could see it was made of wood. I knew I wasn't looking at a modern ship. It was well preserved and in shallow water. That meant it couldn't be ancient. That left open the possibility that this wreck could be something from the time of the Ottoman Empire.
During the 1300s, the Ottomans wrest control of the Black Sea from the Byzantines. And here they build an empire that lasts for 6 centuries, creating one of the largest and most feared navies in the world. However, there's almost no archaeological evidence of it.
There should be many shipwrecks in the Black Sea, but we don't have an Ottoman warship. We know so many things about the shipbuilding activities and traditions and conflicts in the Ottoman Empire, but we don't have an evidence to show people that, yes, we got the correct information, or no, the information was not correct. That's why shipwrecks are so important for every Ottoman naval historian.
One reason the empire's warships are missing today has to do with an Ottoman tradition of dismantling and recycling old vessels. Yeshar's find is a big surprise. He believes it's Ottoman. But is it? Dilara comes to Sinop to meet Yeshar and to investigate the shipwreck he's spent decades deciphering.
Dalışta yaptınız.
Evet.
Batıkları, yani
Evet.
filonun batan gemilerinin yerlerini tespit
Aşağı
ediyor.
yukarı onun üzerindeyiz. 37 metre derinlikte.
Onları görebilir miyim bilgisayarınızdan?
Burada geminin
Here you can see the frames of the ship.
meşe ağacı,
They are made from oak.
kemere
The beam is still stable in its original position.
sabittir. Ve
And you can see copper on the hull.
bakır
Because the hull is surrounded by copper and rot-proof oak, it remained intact over time.
He said that the ship is covered by copper, which is really, really important for me. Why? Because this confirms the wreck is from the time of the Ottoman Empire.
Ottoman warships relied on copper sheathing, an innovation to protect wooden hulls, until the middle of the 19th century.
And now we have a physical evidence. It really gives a lot of richness to Ottoman naval history.
It's now clear that this is a rare Ottoman warship. So now, Yeshar wants to work out its name. Given its location, he thinks it may be a leftover from one of the most famous battles ever to take place in the Black Sea.
Sinop Deniz Savaşı'nı
I learned about the Battle of Sinop from the oldest diver in Sinop when I was about 15 or 16.
bana burada
He told me about a shocking attack on Ottoman ships anchored in the harbor here.
3000 kişinin yaşadığı
It killed nearly 3,000 people.
saldırıyı anlattı.
The Ottomans face a rival power, the Russian Empire. And on November 30th, 1853, in a bid for Black Sea supremacy, the Russian Navy smashes an Ottoman fleet here in Sinop. The date tallies with the age of Yeshar's find.
Elde ettiğim bilgilerin çoğu
To figure out the identity of the wreck,
hangi batının hangi gemiye
I turned to historical sources created at the time of the battle.
yazılı kaynaklarda, görsel kaynak. Bu
These sources
kaynaklar
included
neler?
pictures
İşte yapılan savaş
and
esnasında
a very important chart made by the Russians.
krokiler var. Şimdi bu
This Russian chart details the location of each ship they destroyed.
Şimdi Osmanlı gemileri şurada
Yarım ay,
yarım
hilal
ay şeklinde, tam böyle bir yarım ay şeklinde savaş düzeninde ortada.
Russian sources suggest the attack on Sinop Harbor destroys 15 Ottoman vessels.
Böylece Osmanlı filosu korunması sağlıyor
Evet.
diyebiliriz.
Yani buradaki sahneyi yabancı yazarlar bir cehennem olarak niteliyorlar.
Rus savaş haritasında
On the Russian battle chart,
bulduğum
I found one record that explained the location of the wreck I found. This is evidence it was a victim of the battle.
bu kanıtı.
What's unexpected is that the wreck is outside the harbor
Vatan gemileri
and not in line with most of the other ships that went down that day.
Yeshar examines a memoir written by a survivor of the attack. It helps explain the information on the Russian battle chart. Russian guns had crippled a vessel named the Nesimi Zafir, leaving it afloat but helpless.
Evet, Ruslar bunları zaferlerin anısına yola götürebilmek için yedekleyip çekmişler. Daha doğrusu Sinop'la Gerz arasında bir nokta. Ama top güverteleri çökmüş, alabandaları dağılmış, çok fazla su yakıyor. Nesimi Zafer götürmekten vazgeçiyorlar, olduğu yerde batmasına izin veriyorlar.
Bunun yerine mürettebattan 100 kişiden fazla askeri esir aldılar ve gemiyi batmaya terk ettiler.
The story of Yeshar's find now comes into focus. Because the Nesimi Zafir sank outside the harbor, the Ottomans never tried to salvage it, and the wreck remains untouched for more than 130 years.
Ruslar nereye çekmiş? Nerede 2 gün
We found the Nesimi Zafir thanks to fishermen's nets that landed on it.
Yeri de öğrenmiş olduk.
We couldn't have found it otherwise, since it was 120 feet underwater.
The Black Sea keeps a tight grip on its secrets. But 300 miles west of Sinop, a 14-year-long quest casts light on a secret Nazi plan for world domination.
People come to me to ask my help to find shipwrecks or identify them. I love the challenge of finding a wreck that's been lost to time, revealing something new about our history. One of my most challenging missions was back in 2006. I was asked to help find a World War II German submarine, the U-23. Incredibly, the person who contacted me was the commander himself, Rudolf Arendt, who was 83 years old. I found this very interesting, one of the most fascinating stories of the submarine warfare. I was lucky that I had the first-hand account of the whole story of U-23 from the horse's mouth. I was determined to find his U-boat and discover exactly what happened to it.
Rudolf Arendt takes Selçuk to the U-23's last known location. He remembers that the sub sank off the Black Sea coast of Ava, 60 miles east of Istanbul. Rudolf came to the Black Sea as part of Hitler's desperate war with the Soviet Union.
Winter 41 hatte die Wehrmacht ungeheure Verluste in Russland. Dann musste der Angriff eingestellt werden und sollte 1942 weitergeführt werden. Und deswegen war eben Hitlers Befehl, 1942 müssen U-Boote ins Schwarze Meer, eben um die russische Flotte in ihren Häfen zu halten. Und das hat ja Gott sei Dank auch funktioniert. Aber das Ganze war natürlich viel zu spät im Kriegsverlauf.
By 1944, Germany is losing to the Allies. To stop U-boats from falling into enemy hands, Hitler's admirals issue a dramatic order, telling commanders like Rudolf to sink their own vessels. At the time, he is only 21.
Schlimmer Moment für einen Kommandanten, der sein Boot versenken musste. Denn man hatte, ob man das nun wollte oder nicht, ein sehr inniges Verhältnis zu seinem Boot entwickelt. Denn das Boot war eigentlich für uns die Lebensversicherung. Solange das Boot funktionierte, lebten wir.
Und dann so hinten der runde Strand. Ja.
Rudolf's memories provide Selçuk with crucial evidence.
When Rudolf Arendt got the order to scuttle his boat, he found a suitable bay and left 25 of his people there. He had told me that after dropping his crew, he took out the submarine north, placed explosives, then go onto a small inflatable raft and rowed back to his people.
The problem is, Rudolf doesn't remember exactly where he scuttled his U-boat, but he does have one invaluable memento.
I was lucky that Rudolf Arendt had made a very nice sketch of the bay, seeing from his submarine when he was dropping his crew.
Ich habe das aufgezeichnet, eine Erinnerung zu verdeutlichen an die Stelle, wo wir an Land gegangen waren. Und da habe ich dann die Idee gefasst, zeichne doch mal auf, was du damals gesehen hast in der dunklen Nacht und was also möglicherweise heute noch als Anhaltspunkt gelten kann.
We went from bay to bay and eventually found one matching the sketch. If this was the landing point, then we now needed to head north in the same direction Rudolf sailed the U-23 before scuttling.
Selçuk looks for the submarine with a side-scan sonar capable of mapping large areas of the seabed.
We searched all this area north of this bay, but we couldn't find anything. We couldn't find the wreck.
The 2006 survey ends with the final resting place of Rudolf's U-boat still a mystery.
But I assured him that I would be carrying on with the search after he went back home. After 2006, I was there several times, but I never found anything. Years later, I applied to the Navy to look for it with their much more sophisticated sonars. And in 2019, they called me to say that they had found something with their multi-beam sonar in that area where they have been looking for the U-23.
The anomaly found by the Turkish Navy's survey is a huge break in the now nearly 14-year-long hunt for U-23. An ROV descends into the Black Sea for a closer look. Could this finally be Rudolf's missing U-boat?
The wreck has a list of 90 degrees, so it's practically lying on her starboard side. The two periscopes. And then 3 torpedo tubes at the bow. It's a very distinctive shape. Definitely a submarine. And no other submarine in history was ever lost in that area. There's no doubt. Through the dimensions, this is the U-23.
Selçuk concludes the wreck is a class of U-boat called a Type 2B. A smaller model than typical Nazi U-boats, they offered a solution to a major obstacle of the Black Sea attack plan.
Throughout World War II, Turkey, protecting her neutrality, cut off all passage of warships to and from the Black Sea.
Because they can't sail in, Hitler orders that 6 of the smaller type U-boats be dismantled and transported overland from Germany, 2,000 miles, via road and river to the Black Sea. None of the 6 U-boats, however, will ever make it back home. Questions now turn to what state the U-23 is in, 75 years after it went down.
Guten Tag, Herr Arendt. Es ist so.
14 Jahren sehen wir uns wieder.
Ja, genau.
Selçuk shares the news with Rudolf, who's now 96 years old.
Jetzt haben Sie das Boot gefunden.
Ja, und übermorgen werde ich persönlich das Boot tauchen.
Sehr gut.
Und genau untersuchen.
Ja.
Insbesondere die Stellen, wo Sie von innen die Sprengstoffe hingestellt haben.
Die Sprengpatronen haben wir vorne bei den Torpedorohren und die andere kam in den Seerohrschacht und die dritte ganz hinten auf der Munitionskiste. Die Sprengpatronen, das dauert 7 Minuten, bis sie zünden. In diesen 7 Minuten mussten die das Boot verlassen haben und sehen, dass wir von dem Boot etwas wegpaddeln. Deswegen waren wir sehr dicht dran, als das dann explodierte da hinten.
Es gab eine riesige Explosion im Heck des Bootes.
Despite setting 3 charges, Rudolf only recalls seeing 1 explosion.
Ich würde mich freuen, wenn ich dann irgendwann noch mal wieder Bilder bekomme von dem Boot.
Das mache ich ganz bestimmt.
Schön, Herr Kollei. Dann wünsche ich Ihnen alles, alles Gute. Viel Erfolg beim Tauchen.
Vielen Dank.
Selçuk plans to dive the length of the wreck, looking for clues to confirm which of the 3 explosive charges sank the submarine.
We will swim all along the submarine, and then I would like to find where Rudolf Arendt told me he had to put the explosives.
There's no outward sign of damage on the front of the sub, or near the periscope. As Selçuk moves toward the stern.
There's an opening of about 2 feet by 2 feet, with the steel sheets bent out. This confirms to me that this is the only explosion out of the 3 that succeeded in sinking the U-23. Having researched the ship for more than 14 years. It meant a lot to me when I saw the wreck and that it was the U-23. It was an emotional moment for me. Of course, this all will mean a lot more to Rudolf than it means to all of us.
The Black Sea has only just begun to give up its secrets. Many more lie hidden in its inky waters, waiting to be discovered.
A land of ancient ruins, wind-swept mountains, and deep, foreboding lakes. Scotland is a nation steeped in myth, legend, and mystery. And no mystery is more enduring than that of the Loch Ness Monster. Imagine if we could empty the oceans, letting the world's water drain away to reveal the secrets of seafloors and lake beds. Now, we can, using accurate data and astonishing technology, to bring light once again to a lost world. Can a killing field on the shores of a Siberian lake shed light on the world's most famous monster?
This is the pelvic bone. These are the shoulder blades and vertebra.
Can a marine robot finally uncover the loch's strangest secret of all? And could a long-lost shipwreck really be a boat destroyed by Nessie herself?
When people said that John Cobb's crash was caused by the Loch Ness Monster, in a sense, they were right.
"23 miles long and over 700 feet deep, Loch Ness is the biggest body of fresh water in the British Isles. 100 miles north of the Scottish capital, Edinburgh, it slices the Highlands in two. Many people are convinced that its deep, dark waters harbor a secretive creature. Now, a new expedition hopes to solve the mystery of the Loch Ness Monster once and for all, and discover whether it's myth or reality.
In terms of the mission plan now, you can see we've dived. We're already down at 200 meters of water. I don't think we've been to this altitude in Loch Ness before anyway. So this will be the best resolution achieved in the loch to date.
Scotland's stunning natural landscape includes over 30,000 lochs, the local word for lakes. And for most of its history, Loch Ness is just one of them. But that all changes in the early 1930s, when a new road brings new visitors and a series of strange sightings begins, which culminates in an image captured by a visiting English surgeon. One of the most iconic photographs ever taken.
The surgeon's picture, of course, is a picture which everybody in the Western world will know.
Loch Ness has been drawing fascinated visitors ever since. 8 decades later, over 1 million tourists are still drawn to the shores of the loch every year in search of Nessie.
My aunt, you saw it, didn't you?
Yeah, oh, distinctly. I don't doubt there's a monster.
I saw this hump.
We saw it, the head and the 4 humps. It was the very same colour as an elephant.
No fewer than 1,000 people have claimed to see the monster.
It was the size of a yacht hull.
It looked like a submarine coming closer and closer. And you could see the long neck.
And there's been a recent surge in sightings.
Soon I saw a dark shape in the water. I was further towards the other end of the castle. Something's moving between the trees.
Oh my God, it's moving!
For many, Nessie is a sincerely held belief. Steve Feltham saw something unusual in 1991.
I saw one thing in the first year of being here. Something just shot across the bay in front of me, and you couldn't tell what it was. You could only see a spray of water coming off of something, like a torpedo.
Steve was so fascinated, he set up a full-time vigil.
To be honest, I thought all I need to do now is be ready for the next time with the camera to take that all-important photograph.
28 years later, he's still waiting.
Loch Ness, on which the eyes of the world are focused.
Scientists, too, have been drawn to the loch, and their experiences have been just as mixed as Steve's.
The hunt is well and truly on.
All through the 1970s and 80s, major investigations traversed the loch in the hope of making a genuine zoological discovery. Most come back empty-handed, but not all.
The team of scientists sweeping the depths of Loch Ness said tonight they'd made sonar contact with a large unidentified object. They described it as of unusual strength.
No sighting has ever been properly confirmed. But expeditions like these inspire naturalist Adrian Shine. He's been researching Loch Ness for more than 40 years.
Much of the work that we, with the Loch Ness Project, have been doing is biological. Counting fish, counting plankton, that sort of thing. And that's why I built a submarine. I recruited students, and that's why we collaborate with so many universities. But inevitably, we've become also intrigued by other aspects of Loch Ness.
And no other aspect intrigues Adrian more than the biggest question of all. Now he's teamed up with Craig Wallace, an expert in deep water exploration. They're on board the research boat Deep Scan, hoping to reveal what's inside Loch Ness in greater detail than ever before. And even if they don't find the monster, Adrian believes that 21st century technology can explain what it is that people have been seeing.
We've got a vertical range of 14 meters.
So you've got a very high resolution.
Very high resolution. We're actually going to drop down further to 8 meters, so we're going to double it again.
To find a monster, perhaps you need a monster. At the heart of this expedition is this robotic underwater vehicle. Armed with the latest sonar, it can even adjust its own course to avoid obstacles. It's called Moonin.
It's only now that technology is getting up to that level where we can put vehicles in autonomously, where they're making decisions on their own, which allows you high accuracy navigation.
The first thing Adrian and Craig want Moonin to do is to take a really close look at the bottom of the loch.
Clear the prop, testing the prop.
As it travels through the water, Moonin sends signals that reach 700 feet down. Some believe there might be a huge cave there, the perfect spot for a large creature to hide inside. If there is a cave, it will show up as the signals bounce back to Moonin and the receiving systems on the research vessel. And if Moonin was to detect not just a cave, but a monster, what would it be like? The photograph that created the most popular image looks like a dinosaur. But could a dinosaur really exist in the Scottish Highlands? The country's dramatic landscape is made up of some of the oldest rock layers in the world. And embedded in them are thousands of extraordinary dinosaur fossils which have long drawn scientists to the country, including Dr. Steve Brusatte.
In the lagoons and along the rivers and the lakes, you would have had dinosaurs. These kind of animals did indeed live in Scotland. There were sea monsters here.
But the question is, are there any sea monsters now? The last known large dinosaurs in Scotland went extinct with the rest of their relatives 66 million years ago. And extinct animals don't just suddenly reappear, or do they? In 1938, a fish caught off the coast of South Africa shakes the scientific world. The coelacanth has long been thought to be extinct. It had previously only ever been seen in fossils over 70 million years old. But the coelacanth, it turns out, has been hiding in plain sight. Could something similar have happened in Loch Ness? A supposedly extinct prehistoric beast lurking hidden from view in its peaty waters. For this to be even possible, the Loch Ness we know today would have to be a very ancient lake, a lake from the time of the dinosaurs. So, is it? To find out, we'd need to peer into the deepest recesses of the loch and examine its very bedrock. But over 700 feet down, Loch Ness is too deep for most divers. Instead, we have Moonin, which has now completed its scans, giving us the data we need to drain the waters from the loch. Slowly, the loch's true scale is revealed. With steep sidewalls plunging down. At its base, there are no signs of any caves. Instead, just a barren plain of soft, deep sediment. But with our new data, we can peel the sediment back too, to reveal in the depths of the loch a glistening layer of glacial clay. Clay that can give us a more detailed understanding of the loch's history and whether it could hold a prehistoric monster. For decades, scientists are intrigued by these ancient layers at the bottom of the loch and drill into the lake bed to extract core samples.
That is a time capsule of events within the loch.
They study the core samples and calculate that the layer of clay marks the end of the last ice age.
So we've got a problem. Loch Ness was one big ice cube until 10,000 years ago.
The dinosaurs went extinct long before then. And even if some had somehow managed to survive in Scotland, they could never have lived inside an ice cube.
There's just no way that any of these 170 million year old Jurassic animals could have ever lived in that lake.
So if a monster does inhabit the loch, it's not a dinosaur. So what could it be? Perhaps there's a clue in another famous sighting. In the spring of 1933, hotel manager Aldi Mackay and her husband John are driving along the shore of Loch Ness, when suddenly they see something moving through the water. The couple watch amazed for a full minute as what seems to be a creature rolls around in the center of the loch and churns up the water around it. Later, Aldi tells a reporter that the creature looked like a whale. Her story becomes front-page news all around the world. Aldi took no photographs, but in subsequent decades, other sightings seemed to match this whale-like description. So could the monster really be a huge marine mammal? The problem is that there is no swimmable route from the sea to Loch Ness. And even if a whale-like creature could get into the loch, there's a bigger obstacle. Any saltwater beast would surely die in a freshwater lake. Or would it? The answer to this question may lie somewhere else, in the deepest and oldest lake in the world. At almost 400 miles long, up to 49 miles wide, and in places a full mile deep, Lake Baikal is at least 25 million years old. 4,000 miles away from Scotland. This mega lake is so colossal, it can hold 3,000 times more water than Loch Ness. And still have room for a few monsters. Local folklore claims that a dragon-like creature inhabits these icy waters. But it's not dragons that local scientists have been studying. Instead, they've made a series of startling discoveries that might help solve the mystery of how a sea mammal could thrive back in Loch Ness. In the winter months, if local people want to cross Baikal, they don't go around the lake, they just drive over it. On ice that's up to 5 feet thick. Olga Goryanova is part of a joint Russian-Canadian team that's been excavating on the western shore.
Usually when you deal with research along the shore of Lake Baikal, people tend to focus on the ecology aspect only. The landscape, the wildlife and so on, and all the surroundings.
Olga has made a special study of an ancient community that created Stone Age art here over 4,000 years ago. Some of the creatures they drew look familiar, but they're not Loch Ness monsters. Or even dragons. Olga has a less fanciful explanation.
Here we have swans. This is a more ancient drawing. And here we can see groups of swans.
Along the lake shore is a site that plays a crucial role in the lives of these people.
The oldest layer at this site is more than 9,000 years old. Here we have a stack of dark layers dating back to the Neolithic period, or the New Stone Age.
Olga believes the ancient community here used this place as a Stone Age slaughterhouse.
This is very interesting. Here, the wall collapsed, revealing bones. Look, this is the pelvic bone. These are the shoulder blades, and here is a vertebra.
So what's all this got to do with the Loch Ness Monster? The connection is a creature that these ancient humans were butchering on the shores of the freshwater lake. To find it, we must first drain Lake Baikal. As the ice cracks and melts, trillions of gallons of fresh water flood out, and an unseen landscape emerges, with vast quantities of sediment piled high on the immense lake bed. But if this sediment is also pulled back, it reveals evidence of thousands of years of hunting. Bones everywhere, with all their meat hacked off. It quickly becomes obvious that one animal above all predominates. A sea creature that's familiar to anyone in Scotland. Seals. In every other place on the planet, seals are a saltwater creature. But the bones here belong to the Nerpa, a remarkable species of seal that uniquely evolved to live in fresh water. But how did they first get here, over 1,000 miles from the salt water of the sea? One possible explanation is that 300,000 years ago, Baikal may have been connected to the Arctic Ocean. But when the connection was broken, the seals were trapped, and so had to adapt. Could something similar have happened in Loch Ness? Large sea creatures finding their way to an inland lake and then evolving to live there. Glacial geologist Jeremy Everest uses the latest technology to study landscapes and the way they can change over time. With an array of computing power, geologists can now model the area of Scotland around the northern end of the loch in fine detail. Jeremy also uses an interactive 3D model that works like a hologram, where he can play scientific Moses with a wave of his hand.
I can hold my hand over the model and it'll rain, so I'm filling the ocean and raising the local sea level.
So what happens if the water continues to rise? For example, at the end of an ice age.
Sea levels rise because all the ice is melting and draining the water back into the oceans, allowing water to cross this area of land and enter Loch Ness. And there we have a marine incursion with seawater draining into the loch.
And if the land barrier disappears, could a creature like a whale swim between the two? Lake Baikal proves that saltwater animals can adapt to live in fresh water. So a whale-like creature entering the loch at this time might not be an impossibility. Although many geologists, including Jeremy, are highly skeptical. And finally, there's another problem. Whales and seals are mammals and breathe air. If one was in the loch today, every time it came up for air, it would be spotted. So, large sea mammals cannot be the explanation for the Loch Ness Monster. If she isn't a dinosaur and can't be a whale, what could explain one of the most famous sightings of all? In 1936, Malcolm Irvin became the first person to film a huge, indistinct creature swimming against the current. Many sightings since have described a large animal doing the same, pushing against the wind and water.
You will see a tree trunk or log out on the loch, but then you realize it isn't. It can't be. It can't be. It's swimming. It's swimming against the wind.
Surely nothing but Nessie could ever move through water like this. If you want a sense of just how strange lakes can be, the biggest lake in the world is a good place to start. Lake Baikal's own resident water dragon tends to get blamed whenever anything unusual happens here. And in 2009, something totally extraordinary happens. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station observed giant circles, huge rings carved into the ice. They are over 2.5 miles in diameter. And so bizarre that it's not just the water dragon that gets blamed.
People started to speak about the flying saucers, fairy rings, or underwater civilization, so it looks so strange and so unusual.
Alexei Kurayev is studying the circles scientifically, trying to work out what causes them. Might what he discovers shed light on those strange sightings back in Loch Ness? The most obvious thing about the rings close up are gas bubbles trapped in the ice. At first, experts wonder if this means the rings are connected to giant underwater gas vents that Alexei knows are on the lake bed. He sends a remotely operated vehicle, or ROV, under the ice to see if the bubbles and rings are linked. But deep in the lake, the water's so dark, it's almost impossible for him to see anything. But we can. Using the data from Alexei's ROV to drain part of the lake that's known to contain vents. As vast volumes of water vanish, the steep lakesides plummet a mile down. And now, daylight shines on the massive expanse of the lake bed. Huge rocky cliffs travel along its length, evidence of the giant seismic rift that first created Baikal. Near the rift, raised areas. The vents. These are mini volcanoes, holes in the Earth's crust that spew out hot gases into the icy waters. But there's a further mystery. The sites of the vents bear no relation to the sites of the giant rings, so they can't be causing them. From the air, the surface of this immense lake looks utterly still and inert. But recent research by Alexei is showing that under the ice, it's a different story.
Baikal is covered for several months by ice. One may think that it's slipping, but actually it's quite the opposite. So by cutting a hole in the ice, it gives you a kind of window to this underwater world.
Alexei is sending down the ROV to study how water behaves in Baikal. As it descends, it monitors the density and speed of currents to create a three-dimensional image of the water. His work has deepened our knowledge of how Lake Baikal actually works, revealing that under the ice, the water is in turmoil.
So it's a huge mass of water. It's several hundreds of meters high, which is in constant rotation.
As cold winds blow over the lake, they chill the top layers of water. These then sink, and warmer layers below rise, creating immense currents, which eventually form powerful spiraling eddies.
when you know where the eddy is, most probably the ice rings will develop.
The eddies, with their powerful columns of warm water, corkscrew around, thinning the ice above them and forming great rings. So huge, they can be seen from space. Could Loch Ness contain forces just as strange and surprising as those in Baikal? And if so, might they account for some of the most common monster sightings of all? The ones that swim against the current.
Oh my God, it's moving!
When the summer sun heats the surface, it creates a thin layer of warmer water on top of colder, denser water underneath. When the wind blows, it pushes that warmer layer up the length of the loch. When it reaches the far end, it bounces back down the loch, moving in the opposite direction to the cooler water underneath it.
Invisible at the surface, huge waves form. They are very slow, but they are very big. They are over 100 feet high.
With invisible waves rebounding up and down the loch, big objects carried by the top layer create the illusion that something is swimming against the wind.
That is a perfectly rational deduction, that a piece of material was seen to have a slow motion against the wind, and hence thought to be swimming.
Scientists are convinced this phenomenon can explain Malcolm Irvin's sighting of a creature moving against the current. But there is still one type of sighting that remains unexplained. One of the most common of all. Many people have claimed to see something that looks like a giant multi-humped creature wriggling across the loch. The first person to study the monster seriously, Rupert Gould, concluded from these sightings that Nessie must be a sea serpent. So are all the people who claim to see this just deluded? Or could an extraordinary new discovery by Adrian and his crew prove that they are seeing something real after all? Adrian and Craig are on the second part of their mission to scan Loch Ness. This time, they're on the hunt for a tragic shipwreck, lost for almost 70 years. In 1952, national hero John Cobb is determined to attempt the world water speed record.
He climbed into the cockpit of a 6,000 horsepower hydroplane, the Crusader. Loch Ness in Scotland, the habitat of a legendary sea serpent, had been chosen as the ideal spot for the planned record-breaking time trials.
But as the jet engine that powers his boat pushes it over 200 miles per hour, disaster. The Crusader explodes, and John Cobb is killed instantly. Only small pieces of debris are ever recovered. Where is the rest of the boat and the giant engine that powered it? And what caused the crash? Believers have long speculated that the monster could be to blame. The crash took place on the eastern end of the lock, and it's here Adrian and Craig will scan. It's not the first time Adrian's looked for the Crusader. In July 2002, using the ROV, his team finds what they believe to be a debris field. But 700 feet down, visibility is so poor, there's no way of knowing if this really is Cobb's boat. Now they're back, using Munin's advanced scanning technology to find out if this is indeed the last resting place of the Crusader.
So here is the mission we planned, and you can see that this is really tight line spacing, giving us the best possible chance of finding that engine.
It really is.
We've dropped down very close to seabed, so the side scan's running at 600 kilohertz.
600, that's very high.
So it's the best possible solution we can have.
Cruising close to the crash site, the underwater robot passes back and forth, constantly scanning whatever is below. With the data successfully on board, the team analyzes the results.
What I'm seeing is something much larger than we previously thought. Something here worth investigating.
It certainly is.
Let's process some of the data. So once it's processed, what you get here, we can take a look at this in 3 dimensions. It's the same site gives us this.
Oh, well, that looks like Crusader, and I am amazed.
If they've discovered the Crusader, it could be historically important, revealing details of the crash for the first time. To be sure, we need to remove the dark waters of Loch Ness from above the wreck. As the lock empties, a remarkable sight. The debris field. Scattered pieces of aluminum blown apart by explosive power. As light hits what appears to be the broken aluminum hull, it's clear half the boat remains intact, including one of its stabilizers. And a huge jet engine runs over 1/3 the length of the boat. Much bigger than you'd expect on any regular speedboat. It's the proof they've been looking for. It's the Crusader. But can they solve the mystery of why it was wrecked? And why some people believe that Nessie could have played a role.
After the accident, there were speculations that it was the wake of the Loch Ness Monster.
Adrian and Craig go back to the original footage and analyze the crash, frame by frame. And spot something unusual.
That's interesting. I think we should look at the other side, yes. Right. Now this is different.
This is from the other side, looking from the west shore.
There is an oscillation taking place.
Yeah.
He's thrown backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards.
So she's still fully
Still
in control
going.
as she crosses the measure mile.
She's in control, but she's oscillating.
He's starting to slow down. The camera's slowly catching now.
And down goes the bow, and immediately you see this plume go out.
Yeah.
And there we go.
Analysis of the footage reveals Crusader hits waves. But this is puzzling. There shouldn't have been any waves. Cobb and his team know that they can only conduct speed trials on those rare days when the loch is absolutely calm. They delay their record-breaking attempt until the wind has dropped and the loch is so calm it's like a mirror. So where does the mysterious wave come from? Adrian thinks there's something else on the bottom of the loch that could help answer the question of why waves big enough to destroy a boat can suddenly appear in Loch Ness as if from nowhere. People have lived around Loch Ness for centuries, but there were hardly any sightings of a monster until the 1930s, when the numbers explode. Why the sudden increase? Adrian believes that another wreck at the bottom of Loch Ness may help explain and shed light on the tragic fate of John Cobb. The Pansy is an ocean-going fishing boat built at the turn of the 20th century. She has a 60-foot mainmast, 2 feet thick at the base. But what is an ocean-going vessel doing in Loch Ness? In 1803, construction begins on an ambitious project to link the lochs of the Great Glen into a 60-mile passage from sea to sea. The Caledonian Canal. With this waterway in place, fishing fleets can now cross through its canal locks quickly from one side of Scotland to the other.
Thousands once moved through Loch Ness from the east to the west coast fishing grounds.
One of those thousands of boats is the Pansy. Perhaps it can now offer up a clue to the surge in monster sightings.
So we're going to pass the moon in really close, right over the top of Pansy, so we can get the best possible three-dimensional representation of the wreck.
The Pansy sinks near the center of the loch, close to an area called Foyers. It's here where Moonen is completing its final scan.
If we zoom in here,
oh, look at that.
Now I'm starting to see some extra features.
You have the most classic form. Look at that deep 4-foot, and that digs into the water and allows the vessel to tack against the wind. Look at the rudder there on that sharp stern.
Using Craig's incredibly precise data, we can drain the waters around the wreck of Pansy to show the loch bed here in extraordinary detail, revealing the fishing boat for the first time in almost 100 years. Gently resting on the loch bed, she's remarkably intact, including the crutch on which the huge mast once rested. But the data reveals something unexpected. A missing piece.
Where's the mast?
Yep.
If there's no mast, then how did she get about?
Yep.
Returning to the drained wreck site reveals the answer. Inside her wooden hull, an engine.
The boat was built in 1903, but in 1909, an auxiliary motor was fitted, a 48-horsepower Thornycroft.
Pansy didn't have a mast because she no longer needed one. The installing of a Thornycroft engine allowed her to move between fishing grounds even in dead calm weather. And this simple advance in technology may help explain how a wave could suddenly come from nowhere, as it did so disastrously for John Cobb.
If the water goes calm, a sailing vessel goes nowhere. It is becalmed.
To be able to sail, a sailing vessel requires wind, and wind can disturb the water so completely you can't see a boat's wake. But with the advent of motor power, boats can travel back and forth across Loch Ness in dead calm, leaving an unbroken and visible wake behind them. It's now that Loch Ness itself turns these wakes into something remarkable. Its steep sides and unusually straight shape mean that wakes created by boats can last for hours, moving up and down the loch, miles from any visible boat.
If you're looking across the loch, the vessel, having made it, will have gone a mile or more before that wake hits the shore.
Despite Cobb's precautions, the likely explanation for his crash is that his lightly built speedboat hit a long-lasting wake, perhaps from one of his own support vessels.
They can travel for miles in calm water where they're not broken up. At 200 miles an hour, any wave is going to damage a lightly built vessel like Crusader.
The unexpectedly strange behavior of water and currents in Loch Ness may also explain that strangest of all phenomena in the loch, the monster. From above, they are simple wakes, but side on from the shoreline, the monster appears.
And that wake, observed from a low angle, actually looks very solid.
Just as Cobb's vessel was likely hit by a wake, the many people who think they see a humped serpent wriggling in the loch may in fact be seeing nothing more mysterious than the watery signature of a boat that's many miles away.
Have we solved the Loch Ness mystery? Well, there will be a Loch Ness monster as long as we want one.
Draining Loch Ness reveals a possible scientific explanation of one of the world's greatest mysteries. But for the excited visitors who still come in search of Nessie, and the hundreds who claim to catch a glimpse of her, the monster remains alive and well.
Since I was a kid, I've heard about a lost shipwreck off the coast.
There are stories about the pirates or a battle that went on. There's definitely something out there.
People have been finding beeswax and porcelain for hundreds of years.
These blocks of beeswax had these strange symbols carved into them. And there was so much being found that it's called the beeswax wreck.
As soon as they started describing the beeswax, I said, wait, this is the Goonies shipwreck. That movie was huge.
Whoa, look at that.
It almost looks like a Lannister.
It does. Our objective here is to find a beeswax shipwreck.
This is finding a needle in a haystack of haystacks.
There's more to the story here. Some people thought it was a Japanese junk. Other people thought it was a Spanish galleon. What was the ship? When did it sink? And where did it come from?
Just looking at all the wood out here. That piece caught my eye from over there just because it's off color, but sometimes upon further examination, it's just plain driftwood, which the majority of it is. When I go down and walk on the beach in the mornings, it's the getaway moment, you know. I find stuff every time, whether I'm looking or not. I can't help but find stuff, or it finds me, it feels like sometimes. I found a piece of beeswax, a few pieces of porcelain, piece after piece after piece.
It's like part of a bowl.
Generations and generations of stuff has been washing up on the beach. And that's where I got introduced to the treasure and the beeswax wreck. This is just some of my stuff I've collected for a lot of years. Pieces of porcelain that I found on the beach from the shipwreck. Those ones have writing on them. There were strange, weird stories from the local natives about men from other nations being washed ashore. There's a couple of like pirate theories, you know, that just pirates showed up to bury a treasure and left. I think that it's very possible there should still be some stuff hidden. I believe that the pirates would misdirect where they hide stuff and not necessarily, you know, leave it easy for somebody else to find stuff. It just had me dreaming. I mean, like, literally, like, dreaming to find it, and I almost kind of set up a goal to. I was like, I want to answer that question.
The northern Oregon coast was where little enclaves of Tillamook and Clatsop people gravitated towards. There are stories that were handed down through the generations of the origins of the beeswax. There's a story at one time that there were two ships that appeared offshore and that they had a cannon battle back and forth, and that one of the ships sank. Some of the stories say that a big ship came ashore and foreign people dug a big hole and threw the chest in there. Pirate booty is basically what it was. Some of it was speculation, some of it was very folklorized.
They instilled in all of us the story of the beeswax shipwreck, the story of the treasure, the story of our people going out to the beaches and befriending any European survivors and making use of whatever floated in. I, with my cousin, would go down to Neahkahnie Mountain. We heard about the pirates that buried a trunk down in there. We would look at low tide in the rocks to see if we could see a trunk or a chest. I get chills thinking about going down to the edge of that cliff. You do strange things when you're 19.
Being as interested in all this as I was, I one day noticed at the grocery store a paper with an article about a group of archaeologists that were going to come out here and start doing a little research on the beeswax wreck.
Craig is so interested and so excited and so determined by this wreck. He'd been looking for the wreck since he was, I think, a teenager, maybe since he was a small kid.
Here's a board that I found on the beach.
And so there's been a couple of times where, you know, I just kind of roll my eyes and like, Craig, you know, that couldn't have happened.
Yeah, that was something I was wanting to show Scott here.
Or that's crazy talk, Craig.
You never know what it could end up telling you in the long run, so yeah.
So this ship has been called the Beeswax Wreck for about 200 years. And the reason for that is the first settlers in Oregon, the local Native Americans brought them beeswax to trade, and they brought them beeswax in big blocks. And those first settlers knew there was no honeybees in Oregon. So they asked the Indians, well, where are you getting this stuff? And they said a big ship wrecked many years ago on this beach.
And then one day, I found something trapped and pinched in the rocks down underneath the sand.
Oh man, this is totally a huge beam from the ship, and it goes way back into that tide pool.
I put my hand on it, and I was like, that's interesting. I knew what it was. It was from a shipwreck, and I had this feeling. It had to do with the beeswax wreck. I took a video, I danced up and down, because I was that sure I found it, what I've been looking for, or at least something, maybe that smoking gun piece. I went home just tickled pink. So I called up Scott and I said, hey, what's going on? This is like exciting. Like, this is what I was hoping sooner or later would happen.
Craig is one of those people who gets very excited. So when he found these timbers, he was like, hey, I think these are from the wreck. And my initial response was, Craig, you think everything's from the wreck. And when Craig told me he had found them in a cave exposed at low tide, I told him that, you know, Craig, there's no way wood would preserve for hundreds of years. So at that point, I told him, honestly, that he was crazy.
I kind of just almost hassled him over it, you know. I'd call him up, you know, I found this. I'd call him up, I'd vent about this.
I don't know if he was texting me every week, but it was certainly every month, saying, Scott, you really got to come down here. I really think these are from the beeswax wreck.
I knew what it was, and it was just like, I'm gonna convince him.
Made it out to the cave with the ship beam today. Found 5 other pieces of wood.
And so finally, and honestly, just to almost get him to leave me alone, I said, okay, Craig, grab a couple of little pieces and send them to me, and I will get them identified as to the kind of wood species.
So I went out and I cut a slab big enough off of a beam that was out there, and I sent it to him.
I sent them off to a laboratory to get identified. They were tropical hardwood. This is not the type of wood you find growing anywhere in North America, so the chances are it did come from some sort of shipwreck. I was kind of like, oh, you know, this is interesting. I think the next conversation I had with Craig was, oh my gosh, Craig, I'm sorry. You can now tell me I told you so for the rest of your life. So we started making plans for getting a crew to go out with Craig. Could it be that there was more of the shipwreck offshore?
They gave me a call and said, Art, we'd like to get you involved searching for the beeswax shipwreck.
It immediately clicked for me, and I said, wait, this is the Goonies shipwreck. And they said, yeah, it kind of is. And so that, you know, just immediately set a spark for me. The movie The Goonies was a story about kind of a misfit group of nerds, you know, geeks searching for a mystery shipwreck.
Of this very coast near Astoria in Oregon.
And I guess I sort of saw myself in those characters. I think many of us did. The ocean does not reveal its secrets easily. And you really do have to bring a team of diverse experts with different skills together, like archaeologists and beachcombers. And I thought if we could get a break in the weather, if we could get some luck in the condition of the seabed, that we can find and discover what may likely have happened with the beeswax wreck.
Let's go play with some robots in the ocean, shall we?
Nothing gets an archaeologist excited like a potential shipwreck.
Our mission is stewardship. When we have these kinds of far-flung discoveries, which, by the way, doesn't happen very often.
We've known that there's something out there for a long time, and certainly our tribal community members have been telling those stories for hundreds of years as well.
Beeswax blocks and porcelain have continued to wash up along a 7-mile stretch of Manzanita Beach between Neahkahnie Mountain and the Nehalem River. So our plan was simple: to look for targets just off the coast using our multi-beam sonar, and then use the latest underwater technology to inspect anything that looked promising.
On our first day, we got a 5 a.m. start on the boat. We know that there's a very typical pattern this time of year. Calm conditions in the morning, then the land heats up, it draws in the sea breeze, and the waves and everything kick up. And so we need to start scanning as soon as we can.
It's a really, really tricky environment on our coast here. We have storms in randomly anytime.
We immediately put all our equipment together and we start doing our wide area surveys.
So we're going to try to completely map this whole area so we can reveal the underwater terrain, every nook and cranny. Oh, okay. We'll start from as far inside as we can get, and then we'll work our way offshore.
I could see vast areas that
clearly indicated smooth sand areas, and that was really helpful. That allowed us to eliminate big portions of areas.
It's like 5 meters.
Yeah, I know.
I think it's a depression with the sand.
Sadly, there was nothing I could put my finger on as we were doing that initial scan that really set off, flags for me to say there's an obvious wreck there. As well as the timbers Craig found, one of the most intriguing clues were the strange blocks of beeswax that have been washing up along this coastline for over a century. So here are examples of beeswax blocks that have been found over the years by beachcombers and turned into the museum. Smells like beeswax. At times, so much beeswax was washing up on shore that it made it into the local newspapers. So right now I'm looking at the 1891 edition of the Daily Morning Astorian. And there's an article here of over a ton of wax lately dug from the ground near Nehalem. This is 1909. This little article is a great one because it says that the substance found is not beeswax, but ozokerite is generally admitted, which to me is interesting because this is an Astorian newspaper where there were blocks of beeswax on display, and yet they're still saying, no, it couldn't be beeswax. There's just no way a ship would have wrecked carrying that much stuff. So the most scientific explanation is it's mineral wax. These so-called experts are really totally ignoring what the locals were telling them, that they found it in molded blocks, they found it in candles, and totally ignoring the Indian oral histories. In 2010, a lab analysis of a beeswax sample using a mass spectrometer revealed its molecular makeup. It confirmed the sample was beeswax. And not just that, bees leave local pollen in their wax, making every region's beeswax distinctive. Remarkably, our test found pollen from Southeast Asia. So, did the ship that brought the wax come from Asia as well? Our multi-beam scanning drew a blank. We're pretty sure the ship wrecked in this bay. So what has happened to it? Could it have moved or been broken up on the rocky coastline over the years? In order to gather clues on how the area's weather and currents impact shipwrecks, we headed for a known wreck nearby, a 110-foot-long steel barge that sank in 1983. Time to get the robots in the water. Our autonomous underwater vehicle has sonar that allows us to progressively explore further and in greater detail. It's the difference between sort of seeing the Grand Canyon from a plane versus actually walking down on the trails. 14.8 meters, altitude 3.23. That's exactly what we wanted it to be doing. And then finally, the last little piece is to go in with a remotely operated vehicle. Flash, we're on. Basically, an underwater drone gives us a live feed of what's going on. It's not just sand. We're seeing rocks. We're seeing boulders. The underwater scene is complex. It's very non-homogeneous. It's like we're in a sandstorm here. It's bringing with it little bits of kelp and algae and plankton. Whoa, there goes a big chunk of algae across. Well, you can tell how strong it is against it.
Yeah, I'm trying my best to give you like a smooth picture here. I'm sorry.
The environment here is more turbulent than we had realized. It's just too turbid. Let's bring her up to the surface. Okay, we're coming up. We couldn't see much optically under those conditions. And so we decided to head back in and start looking at the data. So I'm looking at all of our data that we've collected here. This is this barge. This steel barge has been exposed to forces for nearly 4 decades. It used to have a large crane attached, but today only the crane's cabin section is visible. We know the barge was scanned 12 years ago. And so now we have 2 sets of data, so we can see how it's changing over time. Here it is in 2010. That's exactly what a typical shipwreck looks like on the seabed. It's sitting proud. The deck looks pretty well intact, but how does that compare to our data from today? In the past decade, the steel ship's location has moved imperceptibly. It's basically stayed in the exact same spot. This has just been torn apart. All these decades ago, we're now seeing the ribs. Even in the last 12 years, it's gone through incredible changes. It's just getting torn apart now. That really tells us about the processes here. And this is what's happening to steel ships in 40 years. I mean, what would be left of a wooden ship after 300 years? The steel barge gave us valuable clues. Any wreck around here gets broken up quickly. So we had to shift our focus from looking for a fully intact beeswax wreck to the search for components and pieces. Just a few miles south, there's a spot where fishermen claim their nets are getting snagged. So we're headed there to see if at least part of the wreck might be there. First, we'll scan with the multi-beam sonar to get a wide area overview. Then we'll drop in with our ROV to get a closer inspection.
Certainly an area consistent with a lot of the history. It doesn't look super much like geology. It's the slope and characteristics of it are quite strange.
I've found a piece of beeswax in our crab pots there before.
We're following One-Eyed Willie's little breadcrumb trail, I guess, a little bit, but we're going in reverse.
It's a pretty good trail.
Well, this is great. We have a marked spot that could be the beeswax wreck. Let's go survey this.
Investigation into the beeswax blocks had shown that they originated in Southeast Asia. We wanted to study them closely for more clues. So this is one of the pieces of beeswax from the wreck. You can see there's this carved mark. They're not letters, they're almost mystical symbols. What could these symbols mean? We began to look up ships that were missing at sea for at least the last 200 years, and that led us to a totally unexpected clue from the Spanish Empire. In the archives, there are cargo manifests that are preserved. So you would have a list of like, this merchant shipped X many crates of porcelain or X many tons of beeswax, and it would show his mark for that merchant. And those marks match what's been found on the beeswax.
That symbol.
Yes, this one. Those were shipping symbols. And they made one thing very clear. The beeswax wreck was a Spanish ship. So it wasn't a pirate ship or a Chinese or Japanese junk, but a cargo ship. Spain was the main colonial power in the Americas for 2 centuries after Christopher Columbus reached the New World from Europe in 1492. But this wreck wasn't in the Atlantic, it was in the Pacific. To help understand what it was doing there, focus shifted from the beeswax to the porcelain that had also been washing on shore.
I grew up here in Portland. As a child, we all love Indiana Jones, but it was actually really in high school when I was able to take an anthropology class, and it really piqued my interest. And then in community college, I started taking archaeology classes. The coast is not forgiving to the artifacts that we're finding. They're often broken up, small chunks of what we would find. Even though we've got only fragments, they can really tell us where they were made, when, and even who for. The first thing you notice about these blue-colored designs is that they are Chinese. So why were Chinese porcelains being brought to Oregon? We found the sherds were from large plates and cups, matching the European desire for large meals and mugs of hot chocolate. This is likely a cup. We don't really know what the groove foot rim was meant to be or what the purpose of it is, but apparently it was a very big thing with the European market at the time. Using all this data together, we have come to a mean date of 1690. And what's intriguing is that it's 120 years before any Europeans arrived in Oregon.
That beach on that side, there's a lot of porcelain that seems to be right.
So basically what you're seeing is material like directly on the opposite side of where we currently are?
Yeah.
Yes.
And you've recovered some porcelain just north of here?
Lots of it.
Yeah. So, you know, you go here to there, it kind of lines up, you know.
This is an underwater environment known by local fishermen as a place where they've hung nets. And that's always a great indication of a place that could be parts of a shipwreck.
Are we clear? That's perfect. Okay.
We're looking at the data as it's being collected, and nothing was obviously sticking out.
I should have had more coffee this morning.
And suddenly we saw this one area where there was this linear feature. It looked almost like the spines on the back of a stegosaurus.
There's definitely something out here. We're starting to pick up already some linear features in an otherwise sandy environment, you know, that doesn't really look like rock. Oh, here already, yeah, here we're starting to pick up a few more of those. Yeah, it is. 4 or 5 meters long, something like that. And another.
It's the same one, I think. Maybe that's the broken mast. Yeah. Oh, look, it's got a hollow shadow
there's
in the middle.
A whole notch out in this. This is really, yeah, you probably see it in the, whoa. Look at that. Look at it up here in the point cliff.
Look at the bow. You can see the stern. It almost looks like a bow and a stern.
Sometimes X marks the spot. Could that be the beeswax?
It could be.
Now we know that the ship was Spanish, and we know it was wrecked around 1680 to 1700. But why was the ship here? The nearest Spanish settlements were over 1,000 miles away. A vital clue came from even further away, the Philippines. In April 1991, a dive team was exploring the waters outside Manila Bay. After weeks, they made an unprecedented discovery: a 17th century Spanish galleon. Over 160 feet down were the wooden remains of the ship's hull. The ship was 115 feet long and 28 feet wide. The wreck site was surrounded by cannons and hundreds of intact ceramic jars containing the packaged goods ready for sale. More than 34,000 archaeological objects were recovered from the wreck site. No one had ever found anything like this in the Pacific before. It was a Manila galleon, built only in the Philippines. This ship was called the San Diego. It was part of a massive new trade, bringing Asian goods to the Spanish colonies in Mexico and beyond. These galleons carried large crews. They were Spanish-run ships. They founded a colony in the Philippines, and they would use that colony to trade with the Chinese. The San Diego carried a similar cargo to the Beeswax wreck. Its 6,000-mile trip to Mexico passed just south of Oregon. The San Diego's cargo was from Asia, bound for Europe on a Spanish ship. It all fits the picture. If our hunch was right, the Beeswax wreck was a Manila galleon. But which one? We looked for more clues, then noticed something strange. Some of the porcelain was found inland, well above the high tide marks. How did that happen? Once our geologists came out and looked at our sketch maps of where material had been reported, he said the only way you could get shipwreck pieces there would be big tsunami. They are caused by underwater earthquakes that send surges of water up to 25 feet high. A tsunami did hit the Oregon coast in 1700. So we looked for galleons that sank before that date. And the records reveal a Manila galleon that was lost in 1693. All that evidence put together, the porcelain dates, the beeswax that was found, the geoarchaeology information about the tsunami, where artifacts have been found high above the reach of storm waves or high tides. So now we know the beeswax wreck is the Santo Cristo de Burgos. But how big was the ship? And what did it look like?
The scans from Manzanita Beach produced good data from this area where fishermen had reported getting their nets snagged. It's what we thought might be a piece of the beeswax wreck. It fits so many of the historical accounts for the location. And here's our AUV photos. The scans here show the entire area. The gray section in the middle shows the site in greater detail using a composite of our underwater photos. It looked like a pointed boat in the previous lower resolution data, but here, that really looks more like a rock pile. I thought it might be part of the wreck, but it's devastating to find out it's just a bunch of rocks. Wow, this saved us a dive. But there's something else on the scan that's intriguing. We can see this beautiful ramp split between the rocks. It's as if somebody has dug a little channel. It slopes right up to the mouth of the cave. Anything coming into this bay that gets up over to these rocks is just naturally going to get funneled up to this sand chute right towards that cave, and it's like a loading ramp. This is where Craig found his timbers, which is exactly where the geology and the current suggest pieces of the wreck could end up. So it looks like Craig was right all along. Those timbers he found are the smoking gun. If we can recover them and analyze them, we might be able to learn more about the ship itself.
The complications of recovering the timbers are that the caves are at the base of a cliff. The only way to get out there is to hike along the base of that cliff at low tide. So you have to time the tides to where you're walking out at the right time. You only have about 60 to 90 minutes to work on the site, and then you have to hike back. And at that point, we realized that we needed more help to do this. And so we started talking to an archaeology company called Search, and Jim Delgado is probably, one of the most noted maritime archaeologists in the US and probably the world.
I'm a West Coast raised kid. I saw my first shipwreck here years ago, sticking out of the sands, and one might say that was the beginning of a lifelong obsession. If this wreck is a scattered jigsaw puzzle and I don't have all the pieces, a nice diagnostic piece of the puzzle will go a long way towards working out whether any identifiable parts of the ship still exist. And any piece could tell us how big the ship was, or even what it looked like.
We are getting ready. The overland crew we're basically going to hike along this exposed cliff base here, so over all these boulders.
All right. Good luck. Be safe.
You're scrambling over boulders and slick rock faces. If you fall into one of those holes, you could either twist an ankle or break a leg. That's why we had the surf rescue team and the high angle rescue team standing by to help us.
Any swell that comes in out of nowhere is one concern. They're called sneaker waves. And this very cove has been the site of sneaker waves and accidents. Biggest worry is being able to get everything out on time, and most importantly, actually, is doing that safely so that nobody gets hurt.
Yeah, we're trying to move right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wedged. What we're looking at here is a large wooden beam. It's been eroded and rounded on this end, but we can tell it was squared off. And this crack gets really narrow and tight. And I think this is what's held this beam here for the last maybe 300 years. That's why it hasn't washed away.
Radio report just came in. They're going to start pulling out the first of the timbers, and that begins with the biggest one that's wedged inside the sea cave.
Steve got out his pry bar and a couple of short links of 2x4 that he could put between the beam and the pry bar. Oh, Steve, that's perfect. We got it. We had brought out with us a bunch of life jackets. We wrapped those life jackets around the beam and then took those straps that we had used to lift the beam to secure the life jackets to the beam. Then came scrambling around trying to find the other pieces of wood. The next feeling I had was kind of a sense of urgency because the tides were starting to come in. There's a couple of pinch points on the trail back that if you don't get over them before the tide comes up, you can't get past them.
Does somebody have a flagging tape? We can start doing some of these smaller ones because we're gonna have the time against us.
Three.
This is 3. Yep.
So we've been on scene now for just under 3 hours.
Hey guys, we need to start going.
We're losing our window.
I'm running out of time here.
Well, that's not light. No, it's not.
So definitely not driftwood. But you can see the pattern, right? Here, here. There's more of the pattern there. It could be more upper structure.
We finally had what we believed were pieces of the Santo Cristo, a ship lost over 300 years ago.
Let's see what we got.
They may not look like much, but with the help of experts like Jim Delgado, we're optimistic that we might be able to use these pieces to figure out more about the ship.
I think there's 13, maybe 14 total pieces. Not all of them may be cultural from the wreck, but we wanted to basically grab what we could and then sort it out here.
Galleon wood, especially for Manila galleons, is rare. So every bit of wood that we can get tells us something about how these galleons were constructed. Could it be these pieces of wood? Tell us which part of the ship was washed ashore here. So we're going to be examining all those pieces of wood to try to figure out where in the ship they might have fit.
See the patterns there? Some of these you can almost get the sense of this being a bolt that was clenched.
Here's a piece that I can say comes right off of that ship, and here's where it fit in the ship. What else can it tell us about the galleon?
There's something harder in here that we'll probably want to shine a light in. Appears to be a rock. Sorry, guy. We got any water for him? This is a square hole. Yeah. It's eroded a bit around here, but yeah.
Possibly what we're looking at here is where a bolt fastener came in. This one piece alone is sheer, magic.
Yeah.
The holes in the weight of the piece tell us that it likely came from low in the hull.
The more we look at it, the more you learn,
If we could figure out where this piece belonged in the hull of Santo Cristo de Burgos, then we could work out how big the hull was.
Let's make a digital copy we can share with the masses.
I love it. So our first step was to make a 3D virtual copy in forensic detail.
This gives us a chance to take this piece and virtually send it to experts everywhere and say, what do you think? Where do you think it fits?
Our investigation into the beam is telling us a lot about the full structure of the Santo Cristo. X-rays revealed iron residue inside the beam, which must have come from bolts that have rusted away. Okay, this is going to be great. I can't wait to see this. Comparing the timbers from the San Diego galleon in the Philippines with the ones we found in the cave reveal they are both tropical hardwood, the sort of wood that only grows in the Philippines. 3D scans allow us to pinpoint exactly where on the hull our timber fits. Comparing it to a similar timber on the San Diego tells us that the Santo Cristo de Burgos must have been a bigger ship. We can use that information to scale up the ship's structure. That gives a ship that was 130 feet long and 41 feet wide. Fully loaded, it weighed over 1,500 tons, carrying over twice the cargo of the San Diego. This was the container freight ship of its day, and it was part of a nearly forgotten global trade route. That is great. Look at that. They were doing something truly epic. They were taking cargo from Asia and shipping it to Mexico, and then overland by mule train and on across the Atlantic to Europe. This extraordinary trade route continued for over 250 years. So now we know the full story of the Santo Cristo de Burgos. It set off from Manila and must have been blown off course, sinking off the Oregon coast in 1693. 7 years later, a tsunami hit the Oregon coast, smashing the wreck apart and scattering hundreds of tons of cargo along the coastline to elevations over 25 feet above sea level.
Everybody's always talked about in terms of a wreck here on the North Pacific coast has either been an Asian wreck, a Japanese junk or a Chinese vessel, or it was a Spanish galleon. And so, Hollywood notwithstanding, no pirates, no time, no how, no way.
Craig Andes is a good example of somebody who knows that coast really, really well, who has spent his life researching this particular wreck.
As the coasties are out.
But what's most important is that he raised his hand and said, hey, I found something. And he brought it to the museum. And here we are with the biggest piece of this puzzle in 330 years because he did that.
Out here, a lot of the locals have known about the beeswax shipwreck suspected to be in this cove. Joe on the Siggy.
This is the gentleman. Craig, could you put your hand up? So Craig is one of like the beachcomber. that found this thing. Everybody thought you were crazy.
Oh, I know. I've been called Crazy Craig a lot of times.
I hope there isn't any hard feelings that I disturbed, a gravesite or something like that. I'd like to think I did a service to potentially answer the questions that the natives that were local here seem I have.
Approximately.
And over 300 years old. Amazing.
It's direct proof of our oral histories being accurate, but also it is some of the earliest history of our contact with non-native folks here.
But it definitely has a spot for some big bolts to go through. Incredible. Wow. Wow.
This just really makes me think of the people and the things that were in there. When you talk about the beeswax boxes that we all found, the tribes found, and the people that must have come ashore, the people that might have survived and lived with everybody during that time.
With our families.
Yeah.
We're certain that we have confirmed pieces of Santo Cristo here. But it was a huge ship, so more of it is still out there.
You never know what's buried beneath the sands offshore. This coast, those caves, these sands, these dunes, all have held history, and some portions of them still hold history.